Hey guys, welcome back to Vinceville Custom. So today we're going to start a work in progress series sponsored by GarageKits.us Colors. They were kind enough to send a lot of paints to work on this kit that I picked up from them. This is their Denizens of Zoe Fire Elemental Hariqa kit. It's a beautiful kit. I did do a video review on this a while back. I will link that in the description so you can see the actual item that we're going to be working on. It is a really beautiful kit, and I'm really getting excited to work on it. So the whole idea of this series is to give a lot of in-depth information to new people to the hobby. Whether you're new to the hobby and you want to start picking up a lot of chemicals and tools and stuff and you want to start doing these things, or if you've been in the hobby for a while and maybe you want to learn some new tricks, or if you just want to see the item put together. So if any of you guys are new to my channel or have actually watched my channel in the past, I like to actually customize a lot of my items. So whenever I personally get a statue or a kit, I like to change things up. I am not the type of person where if you see it's way it's painted on the box or the way you see other people painting it, doesn't mean that I want to paint it the same way. I want to do my own little take on it. So I like to, re-sculpt some items. I like to break items. I like to put items onto the item, change the base maybe. I do a lot of different things, but we're going to keep this item pretty much the same. But we're going to change the things some here and there, and we'll kind of go over all that. So what I'm going to do is we're going to get a little bit closer, and we're going to start with the first steps of with the kit building is some chemicals you need to clean the item up, why you need to clean it, and get it prepped for paint. So let's get a little bit closer, and we'll kind of go over some of those. The raw kit. Be sure to watch the kit review video in the description so you guys get an idea what the kit looks like and everything that's going on with it. But for right now, the idea is when you get your item in the mail, you unwrap all the pieces that are usually in bubble wrap or however it's sent to you. You really want to clean your kit for a number of reasons. One, you don't know who handled them, if they had very oily hands, if they were eating lunch while they were doing it and it's got oils and stuff on the item. You want to get your item cleaned up. Most of the time is when the item is sculpted, they make a mold of it and then you make copies off of that mold. So this is a mold for something I've done in the past. So you can see it's a two-part mold. And what happens is sometimes people use what's called mold release. They'll spray mold release in here and in there. It's kind of like a wax-based release oil. And what it is you pour your resin in and then you pop it out. And the reason why they do that is they try to get as many copies as they can out of a mold without destroying the mold. Because this goes bad the more and more you use it, the more and more you make stuff. So, but when I make my molds, I like to use baby powder. But I think a lot of people like to use mold release most of the time, at least from my experience. But like I said, you don't know who's handled it, you don't know where it's been, so it's always a good idea to clean. Now, to clean your kit. This kit's a little bit more complex only because we have solid resin and clear resin. So we're going to focus on the solid parts first. We're going to get all that done, and then we'll move on to the clear stuff because clear is a little bit trickier. And like I said, I might be doing a little bit of extra custom work on this, so we're going to change some things here and there. So what I like to normally do is I like to use Dawn soap, concentrated. You don't need to use a lot of it. So what I do is I do warm water in a sink. And what I'll do is I'll put a bunch of Dawn in there, a couple drops here and there because it's already concentrated, and really clean up the kit. Now you can use a super clean cleaner degreaser. I'll use this if I feel that the item is really oily and I think it's got a lot of stuff on it that I need to clean up. I'll use that, but most of the time Dawn kind of does the trick the way I do it. So what I'll do is I'll go into the sink and I'll get the warm water going with the Dawn. And then what I have here is 3M sandpaper. This piece right here is very used, but this is a new piece that I cut off. And you can kind of see the difference. So this is very smooth to the touch almost, where this is still pretty rough. So a piece that I've used for a lot now, what I'll do is I'll use this with the Dawn water. And what I'll do is I'll sit in the sink and I'll kind of just do this very light. You don't need to grind it out. Just kind of get in there with the Dawn water, sand it down, try to get into crevices. So when I come up to something that's a little bit more detailed like this, I won't sand this down. What I'll do is I'll use a toothbrush, and I have one somewhere on my desk. And I'll just use a toothbrush in there just to kind of make sure if there's any kind of mold release sticking in the areas, the toothbrush and the Dawn will help get it out. And then once you kind of get your areas cleaned up, and you feel like you got a lot of that mold release off and your item's getting very clean, you want to dry it and really rinse it off. You really want to get the soapy water out of there. So what I'll do is I'll probably run water through it, dry it up, and then we'll pretty much go from there. So that's pretty much my step. Now you might be asking, why do you need to clean the kit? Well, when you go to use your primers over here, what's going to happen is if you're resin has a very oily substance on it, the primer is not going to bond, and then it's going to start to spider and not going to like go over evenly. So you always want to make sure your stuff is cleaned up. Now we'll go over the primers a little bit later, but I use Duplicolor filler primer for most of my stuff. I'll explain why in a later. And then we have a clear primer for the clear resin. We'll kind of go over that down the line too. But for right now, it's basically cleaning your kit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get all this cleaned up. And then we'll come back. I'll show you pretty much how I lay everything out, make sure everything's cleaned up. And then we're going to start going into the priming phase and get it primed up. And then we'll start looking up errors on the item because there's probably flashing and stuff like that. And we got to clean it. So like I said, we're going to be really getting in depth with these video series. Try to throw as much information as I can. But right now we're just going to keep prepping this item, which is kind of tedious work, but it pays off at the end. So let's get this cleaned up and then we'll start going on to the next stuff. Okay, so I washed everything down. I cleaned it all up. I'm letting it dry now. I used some paper towels to dry up some items. There's still a little bit drops here and there, but I just really want to let this cure up because you don't want to wash your items and then try to go prime them right away, because if you have any kind of droplets of water in crevices or cracks, what's going to happen is the primer will go over it, but then when you go to paint, it creates like a bubble. The water will dry up, but the primer will still be around where the bubble of water was. And then it causes issues. So always make your items dry as possible. I like to just wash it up one day and then come back the next day and start working on it. I don't like to rush a lot of stuff because when you rush stuff, you're just going to run into issues. Plus, we got a lot of work going on with this. So these are all the solid items. This is none of the clear resin items. Like I said, we're not working on those yet. Also, when you put your stuff in your sink or your bucket or wherever you're going to wash and clean your items, make sure you're mindful of anything that's fragile, like these hands and these fingers. You don't want to put these at the bottom of your sink and throw all the heavy stuff on top, because then you're going to break and crush all that stuff. So basically what I did is I washed the body first, I put it on a paper towel, then I washed the head and the two arms, and then I put it on the towel. I washed the hands and this hair piece, I put it on the towel, and I just do piece by piece because my sink's not that big. Plus, I don't like to, break all my items while I'm working on it. And also, too, if you're doing it in a slop sink or something, you make sure that any small pieces don't go down your drain. What I do is I usually use the plunger in the sink, pop it up, fill up the sink with water. I make sure everything that goes in there, I wash it, and I make sure all those pieces come out. You never want to lose your pieces down the sink, then you're going to wonder what happened. So just be mindful of when you're doing stuff like that, because the soapy water, you get the suds on top of the sink and you won't see it. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We're going to let this dry up and we'll come back. And like I said, we're focusing on all this stuff first because she's the main thing. Because we have to put the base together and then we got to get her set up on the base. And then we can start working on all the other little things here and there. So that's where we're at. Hopefully by the next step is we're going to be in the garage maybe tomorrow. And we'll start priming up the item, because I like to prime first and then find my errors, start attaching stuff, and go from there. I know some people like to attach everything and then prime, but for me, I like to prime each piece. So that's what we'll be tomorrow, but we're going to let this dry out for the night. Okay, so it's the next day, and we're going to get ready to prime up the item. Now, as far as primers go, there's tons of primers out there. You just need to kind of get used to what you like. Some primers I don't like, because I think, the thing is, the cheaper you get on primer, the more issues you're going to run into. I've cheaped out on some really cheap no-name brand primers to a spray can like these, and it turns out they never cure, or they crack, or they just stay very tacky, or they don't bond correctly. So I think when it comes to primers, it's best to go and get the best of the ones out there, or get the ones that you feel work best for your stuff. So what I personally like to use is Duplicolor filler primers. They are fairly thick, so you can't really spray it on something that's got a lot of detail. You can't overspray it, but it doesn't really fill in a lot of details as you might think. It's a filler primer where it just kind of fills in a lot of scratches, so it's okay. Rust-Oleum makes primers. There's also primers from Vallejo through an airbrush. You can get Tamiya primers. Garage Kits also uses a primer as well. You could go through an airbrush. I haven't had a chance to use those yet, but it all depends on what you like, what you want to use, and what you get used to. So kind of like I'm a creature of habit, so I've been using Duplicolor filler primer for years now, ever since I got into the hobby and someone mentioned it to me, and it works out great. Krylon makes a decent primer too, from what people have told me. I just kind of have great experience with the filler primer from Duplicolor. Now, the Duplicolor comes in two different colors. It comes in gray, and it also comes in red oxide, and I think they might have like a white or something. I'm not really sure. Personally, I like to use the red oxide for my garage kits, for basically kits like this. When I do custom statues, I use the gray because the gray is easier to work with, where this is great, where it seems to bond better on a kit. Plus, especially if you're doing like skin tones and stuff like that, having a base red kind of helps the paints build up a little bit more. So it all depends on what you want to do. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to go into the garage and we're going to just pretty much prime up the figure. Now, I was going to prime up the base, but the base needs to be attached like so, and it needs to be smoothed out. So I decided what we're going to do is we're going to get the figure primed up, we're going to start cleaning up the figure, and then I'm going to make sure I line up the base with the pieces that kind of hang over the edges. And then what we'll do is we'll attach the base, we'll seam this up, and then we'll prime it. So I figure while this is getting attached and we're setting this up, I could be really fine-tuning the figure, getting them set up. So this way, once this is ready to go, the base will be ready and we can start setting the figure on the base. So this is just one of those little tricky kits where they actually had to split the base, because if they made one whole solid piece, this would be a huge mold and probably could run into issues, or maybe just doesn't have the pressure pot for it and stuff like that. So we'll get set up in the garage now, we'll get the figure primed up, and then we'll start patching everything up and getting it together. Okay, so we're going to start priming up the items. So this is kind of my little poor man's airbrush booth, basically for priming items that I set up in my garage. Basically, it's just a big box. In the center, it's got a hole in it. It's a roofing piece for PVC pipes that is turned upside down, and a PVC pipe goes there. And then what I do is I just hook up the vacuum cleaner to it, which is a very strong vacuum cleaner. So this actually takes a lot of the fumes out and also the dust, because the dust, if you overspray your item in a box and you don't have the fumes coming out, you're going to get dust all over your item. It's not going to be smooth. The other thing too is I have a mask that I always wear when I do prime work, because I don't like breathing in any of this stuff. You can do this in the garage without a vacuum cleaner or anything like that. I mean, like if you don't have a setup like this and you want to do some prime work, what you could do is, if you have a vacuum or a shop vac, what you could do is you could prime it and you could just hold the item here. So you could spray the item, and then it'll just help suck in all the dust so you don't breathe it in and it doesn't get dusty on your item. Now, if you want, you could do it outside, like, you know, like in the back or something. You could set up a table. But the only problem is I don't like doing stuff outside on a sunny day or a cold day or any of that, because I live by the woods kind of, and you can get a lot of debris of sand and dust and leaves and all kinds of bugs and stuff. You get stuck to your item, and then you got like all this caked up stuff on there. So that's another thing you want to be careful of. The other thing too is, if you're going to go through a can of primer to prime your items, if you do it on a very hot day and in the sun, what's going to happen is when you spray your item, the paint molecules are going to really dry before it even hits your item, and it's going to get like kind of cloudy and almost dusty when you're spraying it. So that's another thing you want to be careful of. And then if it's like a cold day, like, you know, you're at your 20s or 30s or even lower, and you spray your item down, what's going to happen is, since it's so cold, it's going to bleed on your item. It's not going to cure fast enough because the cold won't let it kind of. So you need to have that, like on the cans it says like that 62 to like 78 degree type weather type stuff. So you could do it in like 80 degree, like in your garage when it's kind of like cool. You just got to be careful of and get used to the system. Of course, if you like, you know, you have an airbrush booth in your house and you're spraying primer through an airbrush, then you're fine, you're good to go, you can do it in the house. But I like to use this stuff because it bonds very well, it's durable, and everything bonds, you know, all the paints bond to it pretty good. So I'm just going to kick on my mask, I'm going to prime it up, and I'm going to start doing it. Now, one other thing too is, you can see the back wall. Whenever I do these cans, I make sure they're shaken up very well, and I spray the back of the wall for a little bit, especially when it's a new can. Because sometimes what happens is these are old cans sitting in like a warehouse for a while, the stuff gets caked up at the bottom, and when you go to spray it, sometimes you'll get like a lot of gunk coming out, like some like really hard, like chunky stuff. And if you spray it on your item, then all of a sudden you got all chunky stuff all over your item. So always make sure you got a nice good flow of paint coming through the can, and you got to be very careful. You know, you could actually start spraying your can very well, and then when it gets down to this point, all of a sudden all the chunky stuff comes out. So always make sure your cans are mixed up well. Don't overspray. Just take your time spraying the stuff, and it should come out very smooth. Depending on what cans you use in products, I can't say that every can of products is going to be perfect, but I'm just used to Duplicolor. So We're going to get set up. I'll throw on my mask. We'll spray this down. We'll let it dry out for a while. Usually this takes about, I don't know, a good like 30, 40 minutes or an hour to really cure up pretty well before you can start handling it. But usually I like to let my stuff sit for like a day or so when I prime. I'm always working on projects nonstop, and I try not to rush stuff. So we're going to get this primed up, and then we'll start doing all the patchwork and prepping everything up. Okay, so it's been about a half hour. I was doing some other things here and there. So you can pretty much see that it kind of cures up very well. It's nice and smooth to the touch. It goes on very smooth. So what we have to do is kind of start flipping everything over and do all the other sides. So basically I'm just going to flip these over and start doing it. Now you may be wondering if this thing is kind of too messy to put this stuff on. It's really not the end of the world because we're going to still probably be handling it and sanding it down anyway. If you're uncomfortable with that, you could always put down paper towels, or you can put down cardboard and stuff like that. But I have a habit of every few weeks I kind of scrape all this down and vacuum it up anyway. So we're going to get the other sides done, and hopefully we'll start doing all the prep work on it once it's all painted up. Alright, so I had the smaller one right here. I had to find it. And basically you can just take out a little bit of your putty, and you could go into the wrinkle areas, and you could sort of do a little bit of putty work in there. And then you could do around in here, like so. Now looking at the way this piece is, this is a fairly good casted piece. Sometimes you might run into issues where there's a big huge air bubble and you have to fill it in. But we'll kind of go over that a little bit later, which is called Abe's epoxy sculpt. But right now what we want to do is we want to go throughout this whole piece and fill in some areas. So looking at this item right here, there is some little line marks like right here that are really indented. So you see there's a sculpting like texture here, but over here this looks like a casting error. So what you want to do is grab your putty again and fill in that little area there, like so. Now you have to make sure you're not filling in any details on the sculpt. You got to be a little bit careful. Make sure you study the sculpt a lot and go from there. Now I have to go throughout and I have to do this whole line work going across here, around in here, and over in here. I'm going to be doing the same thing with the hair. There is some flashing like right here. I don't know if you can kind of see it in the light. A little bit there. Now sometimes you don't have to putty everything. Sometimes the flashing is just letting you know that maybe you need to cut it off a little bit. So like with the hair pieces here, you can use an X-Acto blade and you can sort of cut it out. Other times if you have these type of tools, you can get these like anywhere. They're just like grinding, sanding tools. They come in little packages. You could kind of use this to sort of re-sculpt the hair area and kind of like, you know, get in there and clean up those areas like so. Same thing with the arms. There's like a little bit flashing underneath the elbow area here. I got to do putty work around there and then sand it down. Now, if you get really messed up, if you get details like these, like this wristband here, and then you get really bad flashing areas, then you got to kind of do some sculpting work. You got to kind of get in there with some Abe's or some kind of sculpting material and kind of maybe rebuild it. It all depends on how well the casting is. These are really good castings and they did a really good job on these. But some kits you can get that are really, really bad and it takes a lot more prep work. I pretty much, the way things work with building kits and statues is the prep work is going to take most of your time. Prepping it, maybe if you want to add magnets, pins, if you want to do a little custom work, it takes a very, very long time. And paint work probably goes a lot faster. And like, even when you do paint work, you know, masking your item can take like a half hour and the paint can take like 2 minutes. So it's always kind of just take your time and go through everything. So what I'm going to do is go throughout this piece and look and see if there's anything major that needs to be cleaned up. You know, if you have Dremel tools too, with like fine tip Dremel bits, if you see something like in an area in here you can't get there with your tools, you can use like a Dremel tool to get into those areas. But right now, looking over this kit in my hand, basically we just have this line going here, and then we just got this line going there. Now, as far as where the head goes on, like say if you have a flashing up here, right? If you have a flashing going around here, up around the shoulders, if you see that the head covers that, you don't need to worry about that flashing because the hair and stuff is going to cover it anyway. But if there was flashing coming around here on the arm, then you want to clean that up. So, you know, you don't always have to clean every little bit up because if other parts are going to be covering it, it's not a big deal. So, I'm just going to go throughout this whole entire body and heads and arm pieces and do all this putty work. Well, after I do the putty work, I'll show you how it looks. Then what I'll do is I'll go in the garage, I'll do my sanding and stuff. We'll come back, I'll show you how it looks with sand work. And then probably what I normally do is another coat of primer over the putty work. Make sure everything is completely seamed up and looking good. And then what we'll do is we're going to move on to start prepping up the pieces to get together with like magnets and setting it up on the base. But hopefully by that time the base will be pretty much ready to have the figure put on it, because I still got to put that together and all that stuff. So these are just some tools that you can get. But you know, a lot of people in the hobby, what they'll do is sometimes they make their own tools out of like metal rod and stuff that they like better. I personally have gone to my local dentist when I go and I ask them to look through their book, and I have a lot of different dentist tools. They're very expensive though. You know, like one tool could be like $28, but I've been using them for years and they're the best things ever. So I have regular dentist tools that I can use to kind of like scrape stuff. I got really sharper dentist tools that, you know, like you could really grind and sharp, you know, take off little pieces of resin. So it all depends on what you have and what you want to look for. One tip I'll give you guys real quick before we go to this is, as far as tools go, I made a mistake in the beginning of the hobby where I was just buying tools like crazy because I was like, this tool's great, that tool's great. And it turns out after all these years, I'm always using the same exact tools all the time. And then I had all these extra tools that I had no use for. So I always go to like these these two tools is always for like, you know, masking and stuff. I always use this for doing my putty work. I always use this tool right here to do some scraping. I got my X-Acto blade. So I really don't need a lot of tools for what I've been doing. I just learned that once you get a bunch of tools, you find your favorite ones, and those are the ones you're always going to use. So don't fall into the trap where you got to keep buying tools like crazy. Just find the ones that you're going to work for you, you're going to enjoy, and you'll use over and over again. So that's pretty much a little tip for that. So let's get this puttied up, and then we'll come back and I'll show you once it's all puttied, and then like I said, we'll get in there and start sanding it down. Okay, so what I'm doing now is I'm in the garage and I'm sanding all this down so you can see what I meant by the piece. This was raised a little bit more than this, so this putty works as a filler going in that direction. And I'm just going down around the area, checking some stuff. So here's some areas here that I saw that I needed to fill in, this round here, and just going around the item, as you can see, around there. Looking at the hair, this area here was pretty bad. So I had to kind of clean all that up. Just going around some other areas there. What I was using is this grinding tool here to kind of go between those hair pieces. You know, working out the hands as well. Just getting all this stuff seamed up and cleaned as much as possible. So anything that's really gunky, like if there's any gunky areas like down around here, I got this Dremel bit tip here. But I also have other bits too, as you can see, just finer pieces to get into stuff here and there, and you know, sandpapers and everything else. So basically what I'm going to do next is kind of keep going over it, making sure there's nothing in between all these little cracks that maybe some resin got into or bubbles, and just clean all this up as much as possible. And then also kind of go into the slop sink or a bucket of water and kind of do some wet sanding, but we'll go over that a little bit later. But right now I just want to keep cleaning this up and getting it as fine-tuned as much as possible, at least this stuff. And then once this stuff is ready to go and we get this cleaned up, we're going to really focus on making magnets in the arms and getting her set up in the base with a metal rod instead of just this key that's here. But we'll get into all that once this is cleaned up, ready to go. Okay, we're going to start putting the base together. Like I said, normally I prime stuff up first, but I want to get this actually together and make life a little bit easier. So what I'm trying to do right now is line this up where everything is supposed to go. So you can see I found these 3 prong pieces with this one here. Not sure where this one, so it's just a matter of toying with the items and seeing where stuff has to go. So it looks like one of these goes here. This one? Yeah, I think it's that one. So that one probably goes there. So what I did right now is I just made a marker, a black mark here, here, and here, so I know that stuff's going. And the reason why this isn't going is because These kind of were like keyed in, but they got these little port spouts around here, here, and here. And we got to take all this down because there's no way we can get this attached and everything. So we're going to go in the garage. I'm going to show some Dremel tools that I normally use for stuff like this. I always wear safety glasses. I do wear a mask and everything when I do my Dremel work. And even if it's just the tiniest thing, I'm always prepared to use safety goggles and everything like that. So the other thing too is resin. It's good to make sure you wear a mask and also have like the vacuum cleaner sucking up any dust. It just makes you know, if you're just worried about resin and all that stuff. So always wear protective gear when doing this stuff. So we're going to go in the garage and we'll go over everything on how to get this attached. Alright, so after careful inspection, what I'm noticing is this stuff is actually is like a curve. It's got a curve, and that's why this stuff's not lining up. So what I need to do is kind of grind it down a little bit. Plus, it's so smooth over here that it's also good to kind of give it like a texture. So this way, if this has a texture on this side, this has sort of a texture. When you kind of bond it together, it should actually hold even better. So this is a sander that I have. This is a very older sander. It's got this very rough grit. I use this to really grind down stuff like this. But when you want to really smooth something out, I got one of these where you can kind of like smooth it out and make it smoother. But like I said, it can also excuse the table here because I just got stuff all over the place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this on the floor. I'm going to grind this down and then we'll come back because you really don't need to see that. But yeah, so like it's hard to see in the camera, but if you were to look at it in like the angle, you could kind of see it's kind of like warped a little bit there. And I think this one has the same a little bit. So yeah, it's kind of good to just kind of grind this down. Now you might be asking, why did I put some lines here? Well, when I'm ready to start attaching this stuff, whether I'm going to use glue, epoxies, or whatever, it's good to have channels to kind of grab stuff, because if something's flat, it's not going to grab as much. So I always like to put kind of channels in things and stuff like that. So let me get these grinded down and then we'll come back. Okay, so I really had to grind these down. You can kind of see that this is pretty rough in here. I had to use a Dremel tool to sort of kind of take this down a lot. And then this piece right here was pretty much warped up pretty high. So all those two Dremel lines and that I did there are gone because this was really high. So that had to be taken down. But it lines up pretty well now. So if you take this piece over here, it's not wobbling like it was before, and it's fairly straight now. This piece here kind of lines up really well here, where you have to kind of like click it in. So it kind of sort of lines up pretty well there now. So I have to play with it a little bit just to line it up, but it's looking pretty flush now. We're still going to kind of do the seam underneath when we're ready. But right here you can see there's water coming out of this, only because when I washed it yesterday I didn't realize that there was a little bit of a hole there. So I'm going to kind of Dremel out a little hole here just to kind of get this dried up a little bit more. And I'm going to put some Dremel, just drill some holes like this. See how like this hole here is pretty much set up. I'm going to do some more holes like that around on both sides. And so this way when we put some epoxy down, the epoxy will help bond it and it will go into channels and hold it together. Because like I said, if you have a flat, smooth area and you try to glue it, might come apart. But if you have channels going in different areas where any kind of epoxies, glues can bond it together, it's going to work out pretty well. So let me get this dried out. We'll Dremel some holes in here and stuff, and then we're going to start attaching. Okay, we're going to attach this now, and just attach it, and then we're going to seam this line afterwards. But for right now, we want to get this attached and secured to make life easier. So what I'm doing is I'm taking my marker and I'm going around underneath of it, and I'm kind of marking up lines so where I can see, because this way if it twists, I know what I have to do. So what I've been doing is kind of toying with it, putting these pieces on, making sure they're lining up, at least to the point they're lining up where I know I could do a little Dremel work and A's work and fix that up. These pieces over here, like so. So like it's kind of like, it goes in this way, but if you glue it on and you attach it, it'll set up correctly. So I'm pretty much at a good spot. I know where it's at. So if you have any types of glues, it's good to get like these BSI glues. I've done videos in the past on these. This is a two-part epoxy which we're going to use, because what you do is you mix equal amounts of A and B together. You mix up really well, and you can pour it onto the item and just go, and it cures in like 5 minutes or so. These are like thick glues, and this is like a gel. I use this gel from almost all my projects. You'll see me using this throughout the whole build-up. But these are like more of a liquid type stuff if I need to kind of pour stuff in an area and let it kind of seep down something. So there's tons of different glues out there. I suggest you get these. They'll make life easier. I don't like to use super glue because if you're working on an item and you're painting and gluing at the same time, super glue clouds your item, where this stuff doesn't really do that. It will still do it if you use a lot of it, but you can use the Insta-Set, which is this stuff here, to kind of get a couple drops on your item. It'll cure the glue in a second and you don't get that cloudiness and stuff. So we'll kind of go over that later. But right now I'm just kind of lining all this up. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to mix up some of this 2-part epoxy into a cup. What I do is I put like a drop of paint in there just to make sure I'm mixing it up correctly. You can see all these little holes that I did on the base. So basically what's going to happen is we'll put the epoxy on here, and then we'll squeeze this part on top of it, and all that epoxy will go into here and here and really help bond it together. And then once this is bonded together really good, what we'll do is we'll seam up the line in the center, but we'll also probably do a couple extra drills to make sure that this locks into place very well. Because there's nothing sucks more than doing something, painting it, and then if you kind of hit it the wrong way, it splits on you, and you have to go through all that work again while it's already kind of painted. So it's better to take the extra steps now and go from there. So let me get some of this mixed up. We'll squeeze this on top. We'll let this cure up for a couple hours. And then maybe if we have some extra A's or stuff tonight, we can kind of start seaming up this area around here. And then we can also secure underneath of it as well. Okay, so we're pretty much cured up now. It's been about 20 minutes or so. There's still a little bit of a gap going across it, but I made sure all the pieces are lining up. So I think what happened is this was sculpted, and then what they did is they probably cut it going across, like the clay. And then when you do that, you lose a little bit. So like if you sculpt something and you need to cut it in pieces, so if you use something to kind of cut it, you're still losing a little bit there. So like this gap right about there is pretty much might have what they lost and kind of what I sanded down. So this needs to be filled in anyway. So I have this BSI gel glue. So what I like to do is, just to be on the safe side, is I'll just throw a little extra gel glue in here, just around the edge, just on like 2 or 3 edges, just for now. I still got to kind of fill this in with A's, but we'll get to that. So I just want to throw it in on some areas, so this way, when I'm ready to start drilling underneath of this, I can set it up. So that little bit right there will kind of just help it a little bit. What's going to happen is I want to drill underneath here and kind of fill in some areas to really lock this in place. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill going across here just to kind of get in a little bit deeper into this line. And then I'm going to run Abe's going across this, and then I'll sand it down. So this will be nice and solid and together, because I want to make sure that this will not separate at all. I'd rather take the extra steps and be on the safe side. So we're going to let this kind of cure up for a while. I'm probably going to, maybe later today, we'll go in there, we'll drill underneath there, we'll mix up some Abe's. I'll show you guys Abe's, and we'll put some Abe's around this area. We'll let that cure up, we can sand it down, and then this will be a really nice sturdy base, and should be ready to go to start putting the figure on. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to secure this base up a little bit more. So we're going to go over a chemical product that I use. So what I did do is, this is a tile bit for my Dremel tool. We'll go over a little bit more with the Dremel bits later when we're ready to start dremeling stuff out. But what I did do with this one is I kind of went around the item here between the seam. I did Dremel in some hatch marks here and there. So I kind of Dremeled into where I started to hit the whatchamacallit, that epoxy that I squeezed in between here. So what we want to do now is we want to put stuff around here, like a putty stuff, that we can seam it down and sand it and make it look like there was never 2 pieces there. So by doing that, throughout the whole project, I'm going to be using this stuff called Abe's Epoxy Sculpt. And the other night I had some extra of it, and you can see what I started doing around the area here. Now this is all cured up, it's hard as a rock, and this is what's great about this stuff. Now, this stuff I use for all my custom work, for all my garage kit building, everything. There's another stuff that's called a Magic Sculpt, but I use that for different stuff. But the Epoxy Sculpt is what I use mostly. They have a couple different brands. They have Epoxy Fix-It Sculpt, they have Epoxy Fix-It, they have Epoxy Sculpt, they have Epoxy Clay. But the regular Epoxy Sculpt is great stuff. Now, They come in different colors. They come in like natural reds, blues, blacks, and they have different colors. I get the red color, which you can see from here. This is part A, and this is part B. Now, if you get the natural colors, part A and part B kind of look like this. I get the red because the red is easier for me to see. It's easier to see when it's on your fingers. You can easily see it when it's get like, you know, when you get some like gunk stuck some areas. So that's why I like to use the red. And also, if you buy from them once or twice, you could buy stuff from their Super Saver sale, and usually the reds in there are pretty cheap. Like maybe it's $5-10 cheaper, which is good. Now the other thing they use is called safety solvent. Now this is made specifically for Aves. Now some people use alcohol, some people use water, but a little while back I talked to the owner of the company, and he says what happens is the water gets absorbed into the epoxy sculpt and it deteriorates. And I learned my lesson the hard way when I first got into this stuff. I figured, oh, I don't need the safety solvent, I'll just use water. I sculpted an item, and the next day literally it just crumbled off the statue because it just absorbed all the water. I've saw friends and I've had know people that use alcohol, but I don't like the way it dries up super fast. So I just use their safety solvent. It's made for it. It makes life easier. Plus, with the safety solvent, if you need this stuff to be thinner and more mushier, almost like a toothpaste, the more you mix into it, the more you can do it, and it still cures hard as a rock, which is great. So usually what I do is I have a little bottle here of the safety solvent. Whenever I mix this stuff up, we're going to do it real quick for you guys just to show you. If you're worried about chemicals and you're scared to put your fingers in stuff, you can wear gloves with it. I don't use any gloves because I just don't care, but you know, don't do what I do. I just showing you guys what's out there. But so we're just gonna mix up a little bit here. So all you need to do is grab a little here, about, you know, depending on how much you need. So we're just gonna do a little bit right now. So just you need to get mixed up that much of the same as the red. Now, I've kind of been at this a long time, so I'm getting used to the point where you kind of mix it with both fingers and like, okay, there's a little bit more reds needed. Now, it doesn't have to be exact. Like, it doesn't have to be like, you know, you don't have to sit there and measure, oh, that's 0.02 ounces and that's 0.03 ounces I need to take away. As long as you pretty much get there, I've been doing it so long that it looks good. So, normally what I do is I'll put my finger in there with the safety solvent, and then we just kind of start mixing it up like that. Now, I use rubber gloves or latex gloves or whatever kind of gloves to mix it up, but normally when I go to my sculpting or I do my work, I tend to take the gloves off only because it's harder for me to handle and sculpt because I don't like working with gloves. But if you get used to it, that's more power to you. So when you mix this stuff up, you have about a 3-hour window of sculpting with it. It's super soft right now, as you can see. In another hour, it starts to get a little bit tougher, but not much. You can still kind of mess with it. 2 hours from now, it starts to get really tougher. You can't really mush it as much like this. And in 3 hours, it starts to get really, really tough, almost hard. And then in an 8-hour window, 6 to 8 hour window, it cures like hard as a rock. So, you know, as you can see, you know, if you were going to sculpt something, you know, you can kind of sculpt with it. I use a paintbrush. I get these at like the hobby store. You get them in like whenever I have these sales, you can use it to kind of like sculpt with it. I do it in a lot of my videos. It's really, really great stuff. So I suggest if you want to get into the hobby, you don't have to get the 4-pound kit like I get. You can get like their 1-pound kit, or you get like a trial kit to see if you like it. Now, other people in the hobby, I know, use different other types of putties. Some people don't like these. They use stuff called Magic Sculpt. It's kind of like the same thing, except it's just a little bit tougher. I use that for other stuff. Other people like putties for doing stuff like this, and they don't like using Aves or Magic Sculpt. So it all depends on what you know and what you like. But you can see my rubber gloves with the red, it's letting you know how much of a residue is on your fingers and stuff. So that's why I said if you're worried about chemicals and you're worried about stuff, you're more than welcome to keep the gloves on. But I like to make sure I mix it up pretty well. But like I said, I take the gloves off afterwards. So, but I always keep the gloves for mixing. Now the next step is, what you could do is you take your Aves and then just kind of go around the thing, and you dip your finger in the safety solvent, glove or no glove, and kind of squeeze it into the area. Now, depending on, you know, how you want to do it, you can leave it thicker and then sand it down really well, or you could kind of take the safety solvent and you could kind of just squeeze it around like so. So you see when you like if you use the regular natural stuff and you don't see it, you get residue on certain areas. So that's why I like the red. Like I said, they have other colors. They have like black. It's kind of like just ink. It's like a dye ink into it, basically. That's really all it is. Now, the reason why you can use a paintbrush is you can really squeeze it into the area. Like really get it into that crack. And then you can see, okay, yeah, it's needed to be pushed in a little bit more. Now, you can use dentist tools. You can use sculpting tools. Whatever kind of tools you got, you can use to really get this into an area. But my idea is we have to thicken it up only because it's sort of not as even as I like it. But we're going to sand all that down once it cures up. So I'm going to do this all around, but I'm not going to do it right now. Like I said, I work on a lot of projects at once. So whenever I have extra aves, like if I did a sculpt on an item or I did anything else, I could run in here and keep adding it until it's all done. But I mean, if you're building one project and you're not building as many as me, then you could go right ahead, mix it all up, put it around the next day and start sanding. So it's up to you. It's just how you work and stuff like that. So I'm going to use the rest of this now. I'm going to fill in as much as I can with this, and hopefully in another couple days or a day or two or so, this will all be around. I could go and sand it, and then we could start figuring out how to get the figure onto the base and start lining everything up, cleaning up, getting everything magnetized with the arms, because when I want to magnetize some stuff, I want to customize some of the stuff around the base, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so we sanded down the base, as you can see. Got it all nice and evened out. What I have to do next is prime this up and really clean it. There's some extra resin around the bottom of this from casting, so I got to kind of curve that a little bit more. And basically, it's just about priming this up, smoothing it out, and getting it ready for putting it together to the base and getting ready for paint. So this is kind of like all that tedious prep work you need to do. So I'm going to have to prime this up today, let it dry, and then when I get a chance, smooth it all out, do another layer of primer, probably do some wet sanding. Like when I do wet sanding, I don't have a slop sink in my garage or a house. So what I like to do is in the winter time, I'll heat up the garage and maybe I'll fill like a bucket of warm water and kind of do wet sanding in the garage. In the summertime, I could just go outside at the hose into like the backyard and just sit there and do some wet sanding or something and wash the item down. Just think of it like if you're doing car work, you know, you kind of like wash off all the metal, you do some prime work, you kind of wash that off with some chemicals, and then just it's like the same process. So a little bit of advice: if you're getting into the hobby and you're worried about resin or the aves about dust, you can rig yourself up a little bit of a system where it's not really that costly. If you have a shop vac already that has a bag filter in it, you're ready to go. If you don't, you go over to Home Depot and get one. So you can see over here, this is a shop vac I have. It's a 12-gallon, and this is my airbrush booth for basically all my priming work and actually heavy, larger items. So what you can see is the shop vac is connected to there, right? So that's what I use for basically doing any prime work. Now when I do some sanding, like say if I'm over here doing some Dremel work, what I'll do is I'll go over here, I'll grab this, I'll take the hose, put it in my vice grip like that, as you can see, and then what I'll do is I'll sit there and I'll do Dremel work in front of this and just sand it down. So this way all my dust is going into here and I'm not getting a lot of dust all over the garage. So that's one way of doing it. If you could do any kind of other setup you want, but that's kind of what I came up with. And another setup is when I was doing this piece here, it's kind of like a bulkier item. So what you could do is you could get yourself a Home Depot bucket, your shop vac, get yourself one of your shop vac attachments you're probably never going to use, or get an extra one from Home Depot. They sell extra ones. Dremel a hole out the side, use hot glue or whatever kind of glue you got, Gorilla Glue or whatever, and attach the piece in there. And then what I did is I hot glued a little bit of a meshing over there, because if I ever do any chopping or sanding in here, say if it's a hand or an arm, you don't want it to go into your shop vac and into your bag. So I set that up. So then what I do is I go over here, you grab your hose, and then all you have to do is you go down to your bottom of your bucket and you connect it to the bottom of the bucket like so, right? So then you got like a whirlwind effect. So when I was doing my sanding on this piece, I was just sanding it like this, and then all the dust, I would just brush the dust and it would go all into the bottom of the bucket. So that's in case you guys are worried about any of the sanding and stuff. So if you don't want to do it out in the backyard and you want to do it in your garage, and you have, like I said, shop vac. This shop vac I got recently was like $80 shop vac, 12-gallon container. This bucket right here is kind of like, I don't know, $4 or $5 at Home Depot, and then that's pretty much all you need. I mean, if you have, if you know how to build specific setups with wood and you want to create a filtration system with filters and do some sanding like on a desk, but you want to blow stuff into like some kind of like an airbrush booth like so, you can do that. But this is kind of like the cheaper route, and it's also you can maneuver for like specific things. So sometimes items are big, sometimes items are small, and if you want something to do it over a bucket or just something small in front of the hose, you can do that. So that's pretty much where we're at. So I'm going to get this base all finished up, and hopefully we'll come back. I'll show you how everything looks, and then we'll start the next video of pretty much prepping everything and getting it attached to the base with magnets on the arms and all that stuff. But we'll go over all that in the next video. Alright, so today I got a chance to get outside and I used my sand blaster to kind of take this down and really get this even, and then I sanded around the edges and got that going. And then what I did is I got a bucket of water outside and I did some wet sanding on this piece here. So if you don't have a slop sink or you don't want to dirty up your bathroom, just a bucket of water is fine. You can just dip it in the water and sand it down. So I got a lot of water trapped in these holes underneath, so that's got to dry overnight. And then once that's just pretty much dried up again, I could do some more putty work around the edge and clean up the seam just a little bit more. So the base is pretty much together and ready to go and all cleaned up. The figure, what I did is I did another coat of primer after I did my wet sanding. So I just got a little bit more pieces to kind of clean up, just some fine detailing stuff where I need to get inside underneath the desk lamp and really kind of clean up some stuff. But other than that, the major stuff around here and up around here and over in here is pretty much cleaned up. Just a little bit tiny stuff in the wrinkles is just all I have to focus on. I did clean up some areas around in here. There might be some more I need to clean up, especially down at the bottom. But that's going to happen once I get her situated on the base. So that's pretty much this first part of the video. Hopefully it gives you guys a lot of info on, sandpapers, tools to use, primers, putties, and just get your item prepped up for paint. There's a couple different ways to take the next step. Some people like to just start painting the item like it is and then glue it at the end. I like to make my stuff with pegs in the base so she's removable and magnets in the arms, and I'm going to attach the head. But we'll go over that in the next video if you want to get into really like magnetizing stuff and setting things up. But I'll explain it in an easier way for people who don't want to do that and just do like a pegging system where they peg it and glue it in at the end and then they're ready to go. But that's a good start for everybody. Hopefully this helped you guys out. Thanks for watching, and next video we're going to get a little bit more advanced and get it all prepped up and ready for paint.